The heavy mahogany table was completely silent. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace in my father-in-law's $5 million Muskoka cottage. Arthur slid the thick manila folder across the polished wood. It stopped exactly 1 inch from my wine glass. "Divorce papers," Arthur said, his voice cold and flat. "Already notarized. My son deserves an heir, Tori, and you are clearly a broken machine." I looked at my husband, Marcus. He was staring at his plate, refusing to meet my eyes. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just picked up the solid gold pen, smiled, and signed my name. Because what none of them knew was that I had my own folder, and my folder was going to put them both in federal prison. Let me take you back 3 years. I was 30 years old, a senior forensic auditor working on Bay Street in downtown Toronto. I spent my days hunting down missing millions for corporate clients. I was sharp, independent, and completely focused on my career. Then I met Marcus. He was an investment banker, charming, handsome, and he knew how to make me laugh after a 14-hour shift. We drank overpriced coffee in Yorkville. We took weekend trips to Banff. He felt like a safe harbor, but Marcus came with a shadow. His father, Arthur. Arthur owned a massive commercial real estate empire across Canada. He was a man who believed money could buy anything, including human beings. When Marcus brought me to their sprawling estate for the first time, Arthur looked me up and down like a racehorse he was considering buying. He didn't ask about my career. He asked about my family's health history. He talked obsessively about the bloodline, about the legacy, about who would inherit the empire. I ignored the red flags. I loved Marcus. We got married in a lavish ceremony that Arthur paid for, mostly so he could invite his billionaire friends. For the first 6 months, life was perfect. We lived in a stunning glass penthouse overlooking Lake Ontario. But then, the drumbeat started. The questions about children. It started small. A comment at Sunday dinner. A forward of a medical article about declining fertility after age 30. Then, after a year of trying with no success, I went to a specialist. The diagnosis was mild polycystic ovary syndrome. The doctor said it would be harder to conceive, but not impossible. We just needed time. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot and cried for 20 minutes. When I told Marcus, he held me tight. He kissed my forehead and promised we would get through it together. He told me he loved me, not my ability to give his father a grandson. I believed him. I was a fool. The next 2 years were a living nightmare. Arthur decided that my body was a failing investment. He stopped speaking to me directly. He would call Marcus and ask, "Has she fixed her issue yet?" Marcus never defended me. He just played the peacemaker. "You know how my dad is," he would whisper. "Just ignore him." But you cannot ignore a billionaire who wants a grandson. Arthur demanded we start in vitro fertilization. IVF. If you have never been through it, let me explain. It is brutal. For 2 years, my life was a cycle of needles, hormones, and crushing disappointment. I injected myself in the stomach every morning. My body swelled. My emotions swung violently. I was constantly bruised, exhausted, and sick. I stepped back from my demanding job as an auditor to focus entirely on getting pregnant. I sacrificed the career I built from nothing, all for this family. And every time a pregnancy test came back negative, Arthur would sigh loudly at dinner. He would look at me with absolute disgust. And Marcus? Marcus would just look at the floor. He played the supportive husband, rubbing my back while I vomited from the medication, but his eyes were always empty. Then, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, the illusion shattered. I was looking for our tax documents in Marcus's home office. I moved a stack of old files in his bottom drawer and found a small locked metal box. As an auditor, a locked box is an invitation. I picked the cheap lock with a paperclip in under 2 minutes. Inside was a medical file from a private urology clinic in Vancouver. I opened it. I read the words. Then I read them again. My vision blurred. The room started spinning. It was a surgical record for a bilateral vasectomy dated 5 years ago, 2 years before Marcus and I even met. I fell to my knees on the hardwood floor. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being crushed by a block of ice. Marcus had a vasectomy, a permanent, elective procedure to never have children. He knew. He knew the entire time. For 2 years, he watched me inject myself with painful hormones. He watched me cry on the bathroom floor, holding negative pregnancy tests. He listened to his father degrade me, call me broken, call me useless, and he never said a word. He let me take all the blame, all the abuse, just so he wouldn't have to face his father's wrath. He was a coward, a pathetic, spineless coward who tortured his wife to save his own ego. I lay on the floor for an hour, paralyzed by a grief so deep it felt like death. But then, the grief stopped. The tears dried up. The emotional broken wife died in that home office. And the forensic auditor woke up. I didn't confront him. Confrontation is messy. It gives the enemy time to prepare. I needed cold, hard leverage. First, I called my best friend, Chloe. Chloe is a ruthless corporate lawyer on Bay Street. I told her everything. She was silent for a long moment, and then she said, "Do not let him see your anger. Smile. Play the victim. We are going to destroy them." But the universe has a very dark sense of humor. Because 2 days later, I felt violently nauseous. I took a test. It was positive. I went to my doctor immediately. Blood work and an ultrasound confirmed it. I was 8 weeks pregnant. The doctor explained it calmly. A vasectomy has a failure rate of less than 1%. In very rare cases, the body heals itself. The channels reconnect. Against all medical odds, I was pregnant. With Marcus's child. I sat in the clinic, staring at the little flickering heartbeat on the monitor. This was my baby, mine, not the legacy of a toxic real estate empire. And I swore, right then and there, that Arthur and Marcus would never, ever touch this child. But I needed an exit strategy. A divorce wouldn't be enough. Arthur had armies of lawyers. He would try to take the baby. He would drag me through the mud. I needed a nuclear bomb. So, I did what I do best. I audited them. I still had my security clearance and software from my old firm. I began digging into Arthur's commercial real estate company. Marcus was the chief financial officer. If you want to find a man's sins, look at his ledgers. For 14 nights, while Marcus slept soundly next to me, I sat at the kitchen table in the dark, tracing numbers. It took me exactly 9 days to find the rot. It was staggering. Arthur and Marcus weren't just running a business. They were running a massive tax evasion scheme. They were inflating the costs of their construction projects in Toronto and funneling millions of dollars into offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands. It was federal fraud, tens of millions of dollars stolen from the Canadian government. I downloaded every email. I copied every wire transfer. I built a dossier so airtight that the Canada Revenue Agency would need a forklift to carry it into court. I packed the evidence into a sleek black folder. Chloe drafted the divorce demands. We were ready. Which brings us to Thanksgiving. Arthur invited the entire extended family to his massive cottage in Muskoka. 25 people, cousins, business partners, wealthy friends, a clear display of power. I wore a dark emerald dress. I looked perfect. I smiled at everyone. Marcus was nervous, avoiding my gaze, sweating through his expensive cashmere sweater. After the turkey was cleared, Arthur stood up and tapped his crystal wine glass. The room fell silent. "Family is about legacy," Arthur began, his voice booming across the dining room. "It is about building an empire for the next generation. But sometimes, an investment fails. And when an investment fails, you must cut your losses." He reached under his chair and pulled out the manila folder. He slid it across the long table. It stopped in front of me. "Divorce papers," Arthur said loudly, making sure every guest heard him. "You have failed to provide an heir, Tori. You are medically compromised. Marcus deserves a woman who can fulfill her duty. Sign them. We are giving you a very generous 6 months of alimony." The room was dead quiet. Some guests looked at me with pity. Others just stared at their plates. I looked at Marcus. "Are you agreeing to this?" I asked, my voice trembling perfectly, playing the part of the broken wife. Marcus swallowed hard. It is for the best, Tori. Dad is right. We need to move on. Arthur wasn't done. He snapped his fingers. The dining room doors opened, and a young blonde woman walked in. She was maybe 24, wearing a designer dress. "This is Vanessa," Arthur announced proudly. "She comes from a good family, a healthy family. She and Marcus will be making a proper announcement soon." Vanessa smiled a sickeningly sweet smile. She was wearing my diamond tennis bracelet, the one Marcus said had been lost at the dry cleaners. I looked at the divorce papers. They were heavily weighted in Marcus's favor. I got nothing but pocket change. I picked up the heavy gold pen. "Sign it," Arthur commanded. "And leave." I uncapped the pen. I took my time. I signed every single page in crisp black ink. I closed the folder and slid it back across the table to Arthur. "There," I said softly. "I signed." Arthur smirked. He had won. He always won. "Good," Arthur said. "Now pack your bags and—" "Before she leaves," a sharp voice cut through the room. It was Chloe. She had been sitting quietly near the end of the table. She stood up, her high heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She walked calmly to Arthur and dropped a small brown envelope onto his dinner plate, right on top of his cranberry sauce. "What is this?" Arthur demanded. "Open it," Chloe said, crossing her arms. Arthur ripped it open. The guests leaned in. Marcus frowned in confusion. Arthur pulled out the first document, the medical record from the Vancouver Urology Clinic, the vasectomy, signed by Marcus. Dated 5 years ago. I watched Arthur's face. The arrogant sneer melted away, replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. His face turned the color of wet ash. He looked up at Marcus, his hands shaking. "Marcus," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking. Is this true?" Marcus looked at the paper. The color drained from his face completely. He looked like he was going to vomit. "Dad, I can explain." "You had a vasectomy?" Arthur roared, the sound echoing off the high wooden ceilings. "You let me blame her? You let me parade Vanessa in here?" "Wait," I said. Alquara was my voice cutting through the shouting like a knife. "Keep reading, Arthur. There is a second page." Arthur pulled out the second paper, the ultrasound image, the positive pregnancy test results. Dated 4 days ago. Arthur's eyes went wide. You're pregnant?" "Yeah," I said, standing up from my chair. I smoothed my emerald dress. I looked down at Marcus, who was now trembling uncontrollably. "A vasectomy has a failure rate of less than 1%. Congratulations, Marcus. You beat the odds." "A grandchild," Arthur breathed, stepping forward, his eyes suddenly lighting up with greedy obsession. "My legacy, my heir." "Stop right there," I said, holding up a hand. The absolute authority in my voice froze him in his tracks. "This is my child, mine alone. And neither of you will ever come within 100 miles of my baby." "You signed the divorce papers," Arthur yelled, waving the manila folder. "You get nothing. We will take the child in court. We have millions." "About those millions," I said, reaching into my leather tote bag. I pulled out the sleek black folder, the audit, the dossier. I tossed it onto the center of the table. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. "What is that?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a squeak. "That," I said, smiling for the first time all night, "is a detailed forensic audit of your commercial real estate firm. It includes every offshore transfer to the Cayman Islands, every inflated invoice, every piece of evidence of your $30 million tax evasion scheme." The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the wind howling outside over the lake. Arthur staggered backward, clutching the edge of the table to keep from falling. You audited us?" "I am a senior forensic auditor, Arthur. You thought I was just an incubator. You forgot I destroy financial criminals for a living." I took a step toward the door. "Oh, and you should know, I didn't just bring a copy for you. I sent the original files to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Canada Revenue Agency this morning. They are probably drafting the arrest warrants right now. Marcus fell out of his chair, literally collapsed onto his knees on the expensive rug. Tori, please, please, you can't do this. I'll go to jail. You watched me inject myself with needles for 2 years, Marcus. You watched me cry myself to sleep. Prison will be a vacation compared to what you put me through. I looked at Arthur. He was gasping for air, clutching his chest. His empire, his legacy, his freedom, all turning to dust in a matter of seconds. You wanted me to sign the divorce papers, Arthur? I did. The terms say I waive my right to your company assets, which is perfect, because by tomorrow, those assets will be seized by the federal government. I'm completely legally separated from your crimes. I turned to Vanessa, who was standing frozen against the wall, looking terrified. You can keep the bracelet, honey. You are going to need the cash to pay for his defense lawyers. Chloe linked her arm through mine. We walked out of the dining room, leaving 25 people in a state of absolute devastation. We walked out the front doors into the freezing Canadian night. The cold air hit my face and it tasted like absolute freedom. The fallout was spectacular. The Canada Revenue Agency raided Arthur's corporate offices on Bay Street 3 days later. It made the front page of the Globe and Mail. The entire real estate empire collapsed under federal indictments. Because of the massive criminal charges, Marcus's divorce lawyers practically begged for a quick settlement to avoid further public scrutiny. I took the Toronto Glass penthouse. I took the investment accounts. I took everything that wasn't tied to the fraud. Arthur was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Marcus got 5 years for his role as chief financial officer. There was no legacy left to inherit. The great bloodline ended in a prison cell. My son was born in a quiet hospital in July. He is perfect. He has my eyes, and he will never know the toxic weight of the name he was spared from. I sit on the balcony of my penthouse now, watching the sun set over Lake Ontario. I rock my baby to sleep, surrounded by peace. People think revenge has to be loud. They think it requires screaming and violence and chaos. But the best revenge, the kind that truly destroys your enemies, it is quiet, it is calculated, and it is executed on paper, down to the very last decimal point. My name is Tori. I am a forensic auditor, and I always balance the books. If you loved watching this arrogant billionaire family lose everything, hit that subscribe button. Tell me in the comments, what is the most insane secret you have ever uncovered about a partner? I will be reading every single one. Until next time, stay sharp, and always check the locked boxes.